2 or 3 months ago, I took an Ancestry.com DNA test, and a month later, I got the results back and analyzed them. In this video, I shall use my DNA analysis to elucidate the history of India. I've processed my DNA file into G25 coordinates using Eurogene K13 and K15 via gene plot, and on the screen is my PCA plot. As you can see, I cluster with Baluja Kapu caste, which checks out. Nearby are other Shudra castes of Andhra Pradesh, Reddis, Kammas, and Velamas. However, let's look deeper into my ancestral components. You see, I've taken the Ancestry.com text file and with the help of a friend, shout out to them, I have merged it with the Reich public dataset to create a merged file that I can run through qpadm, specifically Admix Tools 1, and using that I could see my admixture components. I've also had help from another friend who double-checked my analysis and did some more analysis of his own, and I will link his results in the description below. He used slightly different source populations. And with that, let's continue. Here are my ancestral components as well as my paternal and maternal haplogroups. But what do these mean? And with that, I shall kickstart this video. My South Asian hunter-gatherer amount, or SAHG, is 46.9%, which is expected for my Jati. The South Asian hunter-gatherers were the first set of my Indian ancestors. These people were the first wave of humans to leave Africa about 100 to 70,000 years ago, most noted by the Y chromosome haplogroup H and the mitochondrial haplogroup M, the latter of which prevails the entire modern Indian population, including mine, which is M2C. And it is right here in my home state of Andhra Pradesh, in Jwalapuram, that we find India's oldest evidence of human habitation so far. This site dates to 35,000 years ago, and let me tell you, these people had survived a lot. You see, 74,000 years ago, a volcanic eruption in the island of Sumatra caused the dispersal of a layer of ash on the Indian subcontinent known as the Young Toba Tuff, which is associated with a drier climate which would only get more arid after the last glacial maximum about 25,000 years ago. Like many hunter-gatherer societies, my Paleolithic ancestors relied on microlithic tools, or stone tools made into arrowheads, spearheads, or simply tools for cutting meat. Typical materials that they would fashion microliths from were chert, chalcodony, and crystal quartz. Notably, in the Gangetic Plains, we see that chert is a very precious resource as it had to be sourced from the eastern Vindhyas. Now, my hunter-gatherer ancestors were no stranger to art, and they would paint with red ochre on caves, namely humans and large animals like hunting scenes or daily life. The rock art would evolve, and which in my opinion still survives today as the Warli paintings found amidst tribal communities. Likewise, for craftsmanship, we have evidence of bead manufacturing by drilling into small pieces of flat bones and limestone discs. Indeed, they were such a resourceful people as we have evidence of the use of bone fragments to make awls and that of antlers to make harpoon fragments. Living off the land, they would hunt large animals such as gazelle, antelope, blue bull, wild hog, and deer, and in the north specifically, hog deer was likely popular. Back in the south, they were excellent foragers of freshwater mollusks, namely freshwater bivalves and land snails. Now, we have very little clues to their religious beliefs. However, around the Mesolithic period, we see the construction of rectangular graves for their dead. Burials were ritualized as evidenced by the presence of burnt clay, ash, and charred animal bones buried alongside with the human. And in the Gangetic Plains, burials are observed in a west to east or east to west orientation, likely oriented to the rising and setting sun. Eventually, the climate would get more humid at around 18,000 years ago, and while the SAHG people would have some time left to enjoy India, by the turn of the 6th millennium BCE, India will see a new wave of people. My Zagrosian component is 45.7%. Who are these Zagrosians? Well, let's just say these people play a huge part in my ancestry and even cultural identity. And for that, let us dive further. We actually begin this story not in India, but in Iran, appropriately in the Zagros Mountains. Around 10,000 BCE was an event called the Younger Dryas period. The ecosystem got cooler and the air drier, and we see an expanse of grasslands. Hunter-gatherer peoples of the western Zagros were dependent on wild goats, legumes, fruits, and nuts, which were stable around this time. From 9,500 BCE and onwards, we see an expansion of grasses, almonds, pistachio trees, and of course, people. Soon, from the late 8th to 7th millennium BCE, shifts in climate to cooler and more arid conditions were correlated with site abandonment and shift to lowland regions, living in seasonally dispersed occupations of the foothill regions with an emphasis on hunting locally available wild goat and sheep. And in fact, goats were soon domesticated afterwards, and elaborate architecture started around this point. We see evidence of chert tools, small clay figurines, but curiously none of pottery. Barley and wheat were also being cultivated slowly. However, we do not know if these plants were truly domesticated and farmed or just skillfully managed in horticulture. By the late 6th millennium BCE, we see a full-on goat and sheep domestication as well as that of cattle and pig. More importantly, we see an eastward dispersal of Neolithic agro-pastoral life characterized by a mixed economy. And in more or less 3 simultaneous pulses, these pure Zagrosian goat pastoralists made it as far as India. And in the southeastern portion of the Iranian region, we see the aceramic horizon, which bleeds slightly into India, giving famous sites such as Mehergarh. As the name suggests, these sites had no pottery, but curiously had trade links to Central Asia. These people were likely the ones to have bought the L1A1, L1320, and L1A2 M2393 haplogroups to India. Around 4700 BCE, we see the introduction of primitive pottery for the first time, and complex pottery would start to take off at around 4000 BCE with the introduction of the potter's wheel. Cultures like Toga ware, Kilguli Muhammad, and the later Nal ware and Quetta pottery would dominate this region. These Zagrosian peoples would have met with the SAHG populations in northwestern India and have undergone a mixing event. However, this migration is not the last of the Zagrosian people. Most of you may think that the IVC is just SAHG plus Iranian Neolithic. However, this is very reductionist, and my ancestry is not that simple. Around the time pottery gets introduced, we conveniently see evidence of an inflow of Iranian Chalcolithic people from Central Asia via the north. They were the descendants of the earlier Zagrosian people who migrated to Turkmenistan and mixed with the ancient North Eurasian people. These people had pottery and were much more advanced, and in my opinion likely contributed to the development of pottery in India and the introduction of copper tools and the haplogroups J2A and R2A. It was the resulting mixed population who founded the Kot Diji, Amri Nal, and Sohardam cultures, which would form the early IVC. We have one more Iranian migration around 2700 to 2500 BCE, this time by a population who would have some Anatolian Neolithic farmer ancestry. These people heralded the mature Harappan period. And that explains the bulk of my ancestry, as well as that of many others. However, these Zagrosian people hold a very special place in my heart for a very significant reason.
You see, my native language is Telugu, and I am a proud Telugu speaker. I'm from Andhra Pradesh, of course. These languages share many cognates with each other.
For example, tree in Telugu is Mranu, compare Tamil Maram, Malayalam Maram, Kannada Mara, and Gondi Maram. These languages, just like the Indo-European languages, go back to a common ancestor which we call Proto-Dravidian. The common scholarly consensus is that the Proto-Dravidian languages originated somewhere in the IVC region, and it is in my recent opinion that this was specifically in the southern end of the IVC. Around 2200 BCE, the urban IVC would begin to depopulate due to the climate getting more arid again, and the Proto-Dravidian people began to spread out. From the Aharbanas culture, a close kin to the IVC produced a unique style of pottery that would dominate the subcontinent for some time. The black and red ware, a distinct color pattern formed by the inverting firing technique. Given the proximity of these cultures, we can heuristically use them to track the spread of the Dravidian languages. The first wave migrated southward, hugging the Western Ghats. They were likely the foundational populations of the Salvada, Malwa, and Jorwe cultures, and this migration explains the observation of scholar Zvelabil, who noted that Dravidian reflexes in Western Indo-Aryan languages, such as in place names or clusivity of the first-person plural pronouns. This migration was the precursor to the South Dravidian languages. Curiously, we see another black and red rare expansion, this time northeastwards across the Gangetic Plain and the Vindhyas, and in my opinion, it was these people who introduced the megalithic cultures into the North Deccan region. In addition, it is likely that these people may have also introduced the South Central and Central Dravidian languages as well. In fact, it is in South Central Dravidian that my native language Telugu finds itself in. If you look here, my Y haplogroup is OM97. But wait, this isn't a typical Kapu haplogroup or a Telugu haplogroup at all. The O haplogroup is an East Asian haplogroup dominated in Central Indian tribals like Gonds, Santals, Koya, and Munda. These groups are Austroasiatic or Austroasiatic-like people. Let us uncover this mystery. The Austroasiatic people originated in Southeast Asia in the Mekong River Valley and dispersed around 4,000 years ago, likely spreading rice cultivation. Just like the steppe migration, it was a male-mediated migration by land and sea. These people mixed with the SAHG women to form what we've known as the Proto-Munda people. We actually can see the cultural similarities when we examine the creation myths of the tribals in India as well as the peoples of Southeast Asia, which involve the motifs of people hatching from eggs or gourds. As mentioned, Telugu, despite its history of being a literate Dravidian language, is actually closer to tribal languages like Gondi, Koya, Kui, and Konda than it is to the mighty Tamil. From the Aitareya Brahmana text, the Andhras are clubbed with groups like the Shabaras, Pulindas, or Mlecha tribes in the eyes of the Vedic people of Aryavarta. The Shabaras are at least indirectly related to the Saura tribes of modern-day India, and although no clue is given to their genetic compositions of these Mlecha tribes, all we know is that the Andhras were considered a Mlecha tribe. But how is a very urban cultural group, which at face value seems to resemble the native South Dravidian peoples, have anything to do with Austroasiatic shifted tribal people? Admittedly, this is something we don't know at the time of making this video. Could the explanation involve the megalithic cultures? Possibly. Maybe tribal-like people from the Vindhyas moved to the Andhra region introducing South Central Dravidian, but only future genetic studies can elucidate this. I don't have any visible Austroasiatic ancestry, a fate shared with many Telugu speakers, and it could be that it was present in the past but diluted out, making it seem that Telugu speakers have no genetic connection to the Vindhya tribes. Now, for the final portion of my ancestry. If you squint your eyes, you can see that I have 7.4% steppe ancestry, give or take, fairly typical for my jati. Where did this ancestry come from? Over 6,000 years ago, there were three populations in Europe: the Caucasian hunter-gatherers, the Eastern hunter-gatherers, and the Western hunter-gatherers. The Eastern and Western hunter-gatherers mixed to form the Ukrainian Neolithic hunter-gatherers who formed a cline along the Dnieper River. Around this time, the Caucasian hunter-gatherers had moved northwards and met with a local population to form a Caucasus Lower Volga cline, and there was also an Eastern hunter-gatherer cline along the Upper Volga region, but that is not relevant. The subsequent admixture between the Dnipro and Caucasus Lower Volga clines gave rise to the Sredny Stog culture, who had made way to the Yamnaya culture, theorized to be the Proto-Indo-Europeans, or at least late Proto-Indo-European. These steppe nomads herded cattle and centered their lives around war. Upon their horses, they expanded westwards to form the corded whale culture, and from there, some swung back to form the Sintashta and Andronovo. The Sintashta is said to have been the cradle of the Proto-Indo-Iranians, though I am skeptical given the late date of the culture. What is certain is that some small population of Sintashta-like people reached India and admixed with the local IVC-derived people, introducing Indo-European languages along with the process. Now, there is said to be two distinct resulting Indo-Aryan groups to have established their dominance in northern India. The first were the Copper Horde people, famous for their copper implements which may have served some ritual function. Their language likely preserved the L-R distinction. Later on in the Vedic period, when classical Sanskrit emerged, it had absorbed the L back again from the Eastern dialects, at least in my opinion. Let us compare the doublets. Laghu, Raghu, Pulu, Puru, Shukla, Shukra, Chalati, Charati, Lekha, Rekha. The Copper Horde people had their religion not centered around the Yajnas, but something much more natural. This is in contrast with the later Vedic people of the Kurupanchala region, who spoke early Vedic Sanskrit, which assimilated its L sounds into R sounds, much like its cousin Avestan in the west. The Vedic people religion centered around the fire cult, casting oblations into the fire to nourish the gods. My steppe ancestry likely derives from the Copper Horde type people in a tangential admixture event around thousands of years ago. They introduced the cults of Rudra, who goes back to the ancient Piayi Koryos tradition, to the local Deccan pastoralists and tribal communities, namely as Kandoba, Virabhadra, and Mallanna. If you look at the legends of Valli and Murugan, Mahallasa or Banai and Kandoba, even Chenchulakshmi and Narasimha, you see the theme of a high god marrying a girl of a local community, namely as a second wife. Even the Balijas have Medalamma, who married Mallanna, and similarly the Yadavas have Ketamma marrying him. These stories represent the integration by the local people of a high god into their humble midst. In short, India was and still is a melting pot shaped by the intermixing of diverse populations throughout history, each adding a bit of culture and genes to the mix. Different groups will have different proportions of their 3 or 4 main ancestries, but what remains the same is that we all have these ancestors, and that is what makes us Indian.